Welcome back, everybody, to Ein Sof Learning. This week's Torah portion is Miketz. The word Miketz literally means at the end. In this week's Torah portion, Joseph's imprisonment finally ends when Pharaoh dreams of 7 fat cows that are swallowed up by 7 lean cows, and of 7 fat ears of grain swallowed by 7 lean ears. Joseph interprets the dreams to mean that 7 years of plenty will be followed by 7 years of hunger, and advises Pharaoh to store grain during the plentiful years. Pharaoh appoints Joseph governor of Egypt. Joseph marries Asnat, daughter of Potiphar, and they have 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Famine spreads throughout the region, and food can only be obtained in Egypt. 10 of Joseph's brothers come to Egypt to purchase grain. The youngest, Benjamin, stays home, for Jacob fears for his safety. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. He accuses them of being spies, insists that they bring Benjamin to prove that they are who they say they are, and imprisons Shimon as a hostage. Later, they discover that the money they paid for their provisions has been mysteriously returned to them. Jacob agrees to send Benjamin only after Judah assumes personal and eternal responsibility for him. This time, Joseph receives them kindly, releases Shimon, and invites them to an eventful dinner at his home. But then he plants his silver goblet, purportedly imbued with magic powers, in Benjamin's sack. When the brothers set out for home the next morning, they are pursued, searched, and arrested when the goblet is discovered. Joseph offers to set them free and retain only Benjamin as his slave. So in today's class, I want to cover 3 major events that happen. The first one being Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams. He interprets them to mean that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine throughout the world. And all the food in the entire world can only be found under Joseph's leadership. We're going to see this happen later in this week's portion. But first, I want to focus on his interpretation. Number 2 is when the famine actually comes. 7 years pass by, and the famine begins, and Joseph's brothers, the 10 brothers who initially tried to get rid of him because they were jealous of his dreams that he was having, that he's going to become the leader over the family, over the Jewish people, they come down to Egypt to get food, not knowing that Joseph, whom they sold into slavery, is now the leader of Egypt. So they don't know that the man that they are speaking to purchase food is actually Joseph. That's the second thing I want to talk about. And the third event is really Yaakov's reluctancy to send Benjamin down with the 10 brothers. Why only Benjamin was left with Jacob while the other 10 went down to buy food from Egypt? Jacob was afraid to send his youngest son, Benjamin. Why? And it's interesting because Benjamin and Yosef are the 2 sons of Rachel. Meaning, Yaakov had, I think, 4 wives, right? 4 wives that Yaakov actually had. Out of all 4 of these wives, the beloved one was Rachel, with whom he only had 2 children. One of them being Yosef, who was sent down to Egypt, and the second of whom is Benjamin, whom he also loves. Yaakov loves Benjamin, seemingly, more than all the other brothers as well. Not just Yosef, but also his second son with Rachel. Because all the other sons of Yaakov were from his relationship with Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah. But the 2 favored sons, it seems, are really the ones that he had with Rachel, being Yosef, which is the 11th child, and Benjamin, which is the 12th child, the youngest child. So the 2 youngest the 2 youngest children are the favored children. And it's interesting. We see this pattern play out throughout the Torah. I mean, Ishmael and Isaac are a perfect example. Ishmael was the older son, and Isaac was the younger son. But yet, Isaac is the chosen seed of Abraham and not Ishmael. And then we see the same thing happen with Yaakov and Esav. Esav is the firstborn, but he ends up losing it to Yaakov. And we also see the same thing all the way in the beginning of the Torah with regards to Cain and Abel. Cain was the firstborn, and he was jealous of his younger brother Abel for having his sacrifice accepted by God while his own sacrifice was denied. And he ended up killing his younger brother, but we know that Abel represents the righteous among Israel. Cain represents the general Jewish population, which is still growing, and as well as every human being that is still growing. But we see consistently throughout the Torah that the younger brothers are consistently being uplifted above all the other brothers, which is seemingly contradictory. You might have thought that the older brother would be exalted, because there is a rule that you have to honor your elders. You have to, even with siblings, if you have an older sibling, you have to show them the proper kavod. They have a responsibility to lead you, to show you, to guide you, teach you, etc., through example. But in the Torah, we see the opposite, which is very interesting. So let's go to the first topic in Genesis chapter 41, verses 15 to 16. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, but none can interpret it. And I have heard about you, that you can understand a dream and interpret it." Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It's not by my own power. God will provide an answer through me for Pharaoh's welfare." And we see the word in Hebrew is for Pharaoh's peace. Shalom is used here. We see that Pharaoh was greatly disturbed by these two dreams. Let me just give you a quick recap. The first dream that Pharaoh had was about 7 healthy cows being consumed by 7 unhealthy cows. And the second dream was 7 healthy stalks of grain being consumed by 7 unhealthy stalks of grain. Those were the two dreams. It seems like they were the same message. The idea is that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, but they're going to be overridden by 7 years of poverty, of famine, of lack. That's what the dream symbolized. Why did it have to come in the form of 2 dreams? Why couldn't one dream have been enough? It seems like this was a form of showing Pharaoh the urgency and the truthfulness of this message. That's why he wanted it to get interpreted, and nobody could interpret it for him. From all the magicians, all the people who knew the secrets of the mind and spirituality, but still, they were unable to interpret this dream. And that's why Pharaoh admitted that he needs somebody to help him interpret this dream, and he came to the Hebrew slave out of all people, showing Yosef's central role in all of these events that are befalling Egypt. Yosef plays a pivotal role in all of the events, not just interpreting the dream, but he is then placed in a position of power to oversee all of the food provisions of Egypt throughout these 7 years, to collect the proper portions of food to save it for the following 7 years. Pharaoh anoints Yosef into this position of power. He changes the way he looks. He gives him new clothing. He makes him look like royalty. Yosef now occupies a position of tremendous power within the nation of Egypt, and he is overseeing all of the food in the world, because this famine spreads all over the world, and people realize that the only place that I can get food right now is in Egypt, because that was the one place that they actually were able to foresee this event from taking place by the help of God working through Yosef in order to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And keep in mind, at this time, Egypt was a superpower. This was when Egypt was flourishing. We know that Egypt was a highly advanced ancient civilization. We can know that simply by looking at the pyramids and the construction that still remains today after thousands of years. So what's this verse really saying? Pharaoh asks Yosef to interpret the dream, and Yosef responds saying that only God can interpret this dream. And then he proceeds to interpret the dream. Yosef says only God can interpret the dream. and then he proceeds to interpret it himself. But no. Yosef had the wisdom, the understanding, and the knowledge of God, and it is for that reason he was able to see the truth of the dream. He had chokhmah, bina, and dat, which we know is the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge of the Torah, whom his father Yaakov taught him from an early age. And he was able to interpret the dream not with his own intellect, but with the divine flow that he merited to receive from the upper worlds. So this verse underscores the importance of chokhmah, bina, and dat in interpreting life's circumstances. The same way that when you go to sleep at night and you have a dream, and the interpretation of that dream dictates the impact or the meaning that that dream has in your life. It all depends on the interpretation. So too, in this physical world, life is a dream in many ways, in the sense that we have this illusion that we're separate from God. We believe that we're separate from God. That's the dream. That's the illusion of this world. It's that we believe that we are somehow separated from the unity of the Ein Sof. The Shema Yisrael comes to tell you that you're wrong. It comes to tell you that what your mind and your heart is telling you, what your eyes are, giving you testimony as a witness to this separated world, that there is no true oneness, there is no true unity with God, despite what your senses tell you. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We cover our eyes because the eyes are those organs that are lying to us, because when they're controlled by the heart, it does not allow you to see the truth. But when you allow the flow of chokhmah, bina, and dat to enter into your head, which means that you've studied the secrets of the Torah according to your portion, then your eyes can see deeper into the reality, into the truth of reality, because it's going past the klipot. This world is a world of klipa. Everything is masked and concealed, and there's shells, and it seems like there is darkness and evil, and we're unable to see the truth behind it all. But when you act like Yosef, when you control your brit, which is your covenant with God, your sexual organ, your sexual purity, needs to be maintained. You are then able to access the upper three sefirot, chokhmah, bina, dat, which brings you divine flow and allows you to perceive the truth of reality and experience the oneness that the sages swear exists. But those of us who are not tapped into that consciousness are left as a witness, a false witness, to the separation of reality. We are accusing God of being a fraud. Right now, if you are unable to see the oneness of God, and I'm not saying I'm able to do that, this is something that we're all working toward. But if our senses are telling us that this is a world of separation and chaos, then we know that we are not tapped into the truth of reality. We are in a dream. And that's why, without Torah, we are bound to be like Pharaoh, not knowing the truth of what this dream really means. And this is literal as well. If you ever have dreams at nighttime and you want to know what they actually mean, because every dream has a meaning, then how are you going to interpret that dream if you don't know the truth? If you don't know Torah, how can you interpret the dream? You're going to interpret it according to your limited mindset and understanding of what those symbols represent in the spiritual world in relation to your own soul and life circumstances? You need the clarity of truth in order to interpret the dream. So the same thing applies today. We are facing a world that is much like a dream, and it requires a mind that is illuminated by Torah, which brings clarity and truth. For example, Israel's struggles with Hamas and rising anti-Semitism can be viewed as chaos. You can view it through the lens of, this is punishment, God hates Israel, God is punishing us, the nations are right, Israel is bad, we have to give up our mission. That's one way of looking at it. Or you can see it as part of the divine process leading to the ultimate redemption, which will be happening, if not in our days, then in our children's days. And if not in their days, then in their children's days. It's just a few years away, maybe a few generations, but it could happen any moment now. The events can speed up. God is in control. God is moving his hand and causing the events to unfold the way they are. The way Israel is being exalted at this current moment. And anti-Semitism is increasing. This is all being orchestrated by the divine plan. But only through the wisdom of the Torah can we recognize that. Can we interpret such challenges within the context of God's overarching plan for humanity, which allows us to act with emunah and tachlit, purpose. Faith and purpose rather than despair or confusion, which the sages and the Zohar says marks the end of days. The confusion of what is true and what is false will cover the world before the redemption happens. Confusion and despair and depression will increase tremendously before the redemption takes place. But that does not mean that you have to experience that. You don't have to be part of that group. If you were able to take the message from this week's Parsha, act like Yosef, and bring the light of the Torah within your mind to bring the clarity you need to see the goodness of God as increasing. It's not darkness that's increasing. It's the goodness that's increasing, the light that's shining brighter. But if your vessel is not built properly, then you are unable to perceive it. That's really the answer. It's all within. Moving on. Amid the famine, Joseph's brothers come down to Egypt. They want to buy grain, but they don't know that Joseph is really the one that they're facing. And it's been decades since he's seen his brothers. Imagine how many emotions were racing through Joseph's heart at this moment, at the sight of his brothers coming down. And they bowed down to him because, as a form of respect, that was the fulfillment of Joseph's dream, that his brothers would bow down to him. Joseph had a couple dreams, that he would be the ruler over the Jewish people. And that was the reason why the brothers hated him so much, that they sold him into slavery. And yet we see in this week's portion that that dream was a prophecy that came into fruition when they wanted to buy food. So they went down to Egypt and they bowed down to this Egyptian man, not knowing that that was actually Joseph. What's the lesson here? What's the famine represent? In spirituality, food represents wisdom. So therefore, hunger, starvation, famine represents a desire to know God. In spirituality, hunger means a longing, a yearning to receive the light of God, which is that food and that nourishment that sustains the soul. That's the same food that Moses was sustained by when he was up on the mountain for 40 nights and 40 days when he received the Torah. So this famine, which is happening in the world in this week's portion, which caused all the people to come to Egypt to buy food, is relevant to us because it represents a spiritual famine which we are in right now. The world is in a spiritual famine, and this is crazy because the light of God is more available than ever before, yet people are starving more than ever before because the selfishness is increasing. The antidote to the selfishness is the Torah. The Torah is more available now than ever before. Go to Sefaria.org. Go to Chabad.org. Go to ArtScroll. All the books you could ever ask for, thousands of dollars worth of books available to you for free in all languages, not all languages, but English and Hebrew, Kabbalah books, Chassidut books, Tanakh, etc., Shas and Poskim, Talmud, Gemara, etc., everything available for free. So the availability of food, spiritual food, which is light and Torah, is more than ever before today. Yet people are hungrier than ever before. Much of the world is starved for light and holiness. Look out into the world. You can't walk a single block without seeing some inappropriate image, whether through an advertisement or a billboard or a movie trailer, whatever it may be, a magazine. So the same way that Yosef's brothers acknowledge their guilt in the face of this famine, they remember what they did when they sold Yosef. We must recognize that our spiritual hunger exists as well. We must recognize that we are in a famine. If we are not aware of this famine, then we are unable to bring the fulfillment that we truly seek deep down, which is redemption. We're unable to cry out for Mashiach because we're unaware of the lack. We're unaware of the famine. We don't know the problem. Therefore, we don't know the solution. Many people today are so disconnected from their souls that they don't even realize that they are starving for God's light. They're so busy filling up their stomach with physical food that they are unable to hear the cry of the soul to return to God's light. The physical food is obstructing their spiritual perception and their understanding of what they need in order to reach completion. All the events in Israel, Hamas attacks, anti-Semitism, global instability, being on the brink of moral collapse, etc., they're not just physical battles. A physical famine, a physical war, that's not the root of the conflict. Rather, they are reflections of a deeper spiritual famine where humanity has lost its connection to holiness. The root of all problems is within. The root of all famines in the physical and wars in the physical are the famines and wars that we are neglecting to address in our own lives. Recognizing this spiritual emptiness is the first step to returning to the light of Torah and repairing the inner soul. If you're not aware of the flaw, there's no way to bring healing. You'll keep fixing the symptom, but you never address the true cause, and therefore, you never actually made your tikkun. You were avoiding it the whole time. You might think you were doing your tikkun, you take medication, you keep, avoiding the root problem. That way you can avoid the pain, you can avoid the discomfort. Science and technology can come to help you avoid your problems. You want to avoid your problems? You will find a way to do it. And that's your free will. But if we're honest, if we're conscious, then we will recognize this famine within us. And finally, let's talk about Jacob's fear. Jacob had a few instances of fear throughout the last few portions. He was afraid of Esav that was coming to kill him. Now he's afraid of losing Benjamin. Where's his emunah? What happened to his faith? The truth is, the brothers of Yosef lied to their father that Yosef died, when in reality they just sold him to slavery. And then Yaakov falls into despair. Yaakov had Tzaddik, one of the three patriarchs. He falls into despair, the midst of depression, over the loss of his son Yosef. He ended up coming back to his spiritual stature, but while he was down, the light of the Shekhinah departed from him. Because the Shekhinah can only dwell in a vessel of simcha, joy. Wherever there is no joy, the light of God is not there. If a person feels depressed, sad, angry, jealous, the light of God, the light of the Shekhinah, cannot dwell within that person. Wherever there's joy, true joy, not fleeting momentary happiness. There's a difference between happiness and simcha. Simcha comes from the soul. Simcha has to do with the neshama. While happiness is the body. Yeah, I can make my body happy in many, many different ways. Whenever I'm at a red light and it turns green, I get happy. When I'm able to get away with crime, I get happy. When I satisfy my selfish pleasures, I get happy. But where's my joy? Why am I seeking those external pleasures? I must be lacking joy. Because if you have joy, you don't even need those external fancies to fill up your lacks, because you're able to address them at their root, which is the spiritual. And when you address them and when you bring the healing, the light that occupies that space is the joy of the soul. You've brought the soul back into the body. But while you're in despair, the light cannot dwell within you. But now Jacob realizes that he has to send his younger son Benjamin down to Egypt, because whoever this Egyptian man is that's refusing to sell us the food, for whatever reason, is demanding that we bring the youngest son Benjamin as well. He wants the brothers to go all the way back to Canaan, bring back Benjamin, and come all the way back, and then he will sell them the food. So the brothers return without Shimon, because Yosef is holding Shimon as a captive to ensure that the brothers will come back. And Jacob refuses to send Benjamin. They came all this way back to Canaan to get Benjamin, and now Jacob says, no, I'm not going to send him. But the famine gets worse, and Yaakov realizes he has no choice here. He has to send him down. Otherwise, they're going to starve. So, what does Yaakov do? He allows Benjamin to return with his brothers, and he places his trust in God. He says, I understand. This is all coming from God. Whatever needs to happen, needs to happen. I have to send Benjamin. Hashem is orchestrating the whole plan. Yaakov had that emunah. What's the lesson in this whole story? Jacob's fear. Jacob's fear represents that opposing force, that internal struggle along our spiritual journey. The challenge of letting go and trusting in God in the face of overwhelming threats. Imagine you're surrounded by enemies, like Israel. Like any Jew being surrounded in the diaspora, not that the Gentiles are enemies, God forbid, but the forces that are drawing them away from Torah are abundant. Whether it be the media, whether it be advertisements, going out into the street and seeing impure things, impure thoughts. The world of the diaspora is a place that you can fulfill your deepest lusts. Not just in the diaspora, even in the land of Israel today, unfortunately. We're not living in the Israel that is promised in the Bible. The Torah is talking about a land of milk and honey, a land of Torah and holiness and life and Shabbat and kosher and tefillin and Kabbalah and achdut, unity. That's the true Israel. However, this Israel that we have today is the potential state of the true Israel, which will be coming very soon, but not without our participation. If you want to really experience that Israel, if you want to experience the state of Israel within you, you have to prepare your vessel now. Otherwise, it's going to come, it's happening, but you won't be able to be part of it because you didn't build your vessel. So there's nothing comes for free. No pain, no gain. It's a general rule throughout the Torah and Kabbalah. But today Israel is facing similar threats, the same way that, Yaakov was afraid to send Benjamin down. There was a fear there. So too, it could be many people, Jews or non-Jews, are experiencing fear in the face of enemies, spiritual or physical. Whether about global isolation. Right now, Israel is being isolated from among all the other nations. Look at the United Nations. They're selecting Israel and distinguishing them as the most evil out of all the other peoples. They're focusing on Israel, condemning them. There's more resolutions against Israel than any other nation. Whether it be Hamas's attacks, or Hezbollah, or whatever it is, ISIS, whatever it is. Right now we see a new regime entering Syria. We hope for them to be peaceful, but we don't know. Rising anti-Semitism. These are things that Israel is right now facing. Jews are right now facing. These external battles symbolize the internal war. In fact, the United Nations, Hamas, anti-Semitism, all these external threats are rooted in our own inner psychology. A struggle to trust in God's ultimate plan and sovereignty. They can't touch you if you're connected to God. They can't win in this war because the light ultimately prevails, even in the face of temporary darkness. The hatred of bodies, like the United Nations, mirrors the spiritual forces working against Israel's divine mission. Those are the negative thoughts that unite against you. Those are the United Nations. The United Nations are all those thoughts and emotions within your inner world that try to prevent you from exerting the necessary force in order to make a distinction between good and evil. The true battle is within. To trust God and act with moral clarity despite the opposition. And Kabbalah comes to teach that these external forces mirror the internal fears, and only by conquering the inner war, replacing fear with emunah, the same way Yaakov does, by ultimately allowing his son Benjamin to go down, recognizing that this famine is truly from God, and whatever is happening is being orchestrated by the divine hand. And only when we replace this fear with emunah, the same way Yaakov did, can the external battles ultimately lead us to redemption. We have to go through this process of growing up. We start with fear. Yes, we start with uncertainty and confusion. But slowly, through learning Torah and through committing our heart to prayer, really doing the proper work that constitutes a Baal Teshuvah. A Baal Teshuvah, master of returning, master of repentance. Baal Teshuvah is somebody who has mastered the art of Teshuvah. That means that they do the Teshuvah before they make any decision. That's right. Tzaddikim perform the Teshuvah before they make the decision, whether to think, speak, or act. Most people, they wait until they sin, and then after they made the sin, they do Teshuvah. And even then, it's not always adequate. But true tzaddikim always think twice. They always, reflect before they speak or before they act. They're always 2 steps ahead of the game. They've done their teshuvah already before they made the decision. Therefore, they know for sure that whatever comes out of them, whether there be thoughts, speech, or actions, they've already been thoroughly examined and investigated before they allowed it to emerge into the world. Because every thought and every speech and every action changes the world forever. Are you doing the teshuvah before you make those decisions? Or are you waiting to sin before making the teshuvah? So those are some of the major themes in this week's Parsha. I hope that the lessons provided you with some chizuk, encouragement to face your battles. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. And I'll see you in the next video.